where there is a bit of a lull in the activity, but that lull is essentially reinforcing this position of Libya now being essentially a failed state.
Do you think that he actually sees it that way, though? I mean, the activity we've seen in the bases near Tripoli doesn't really suggest to me that he believes your assertion that the east of the country is lost and it's a failed state. He seems to think this is recoverable, as does his son, who appears to be a bit more rational than he is.
Gaddafi has always had a huge disconnect from reality. I think now, at this particular moment, I don't know who he's advising him or who's reporting to him, but the images and the video clips and the interviews and every bit of information we see from the eastern part of the country and some parts of the west suggest that about 70% of Libya's territory is outside of the control of his military and security personnel. Now, he may not believe that. He may also believe that he can regain the upper hand through a counter attack. He's also buying time to essentially get some composure, plan ahead, perhaps bring in more mercenaries, or create the assumption out that he's still around. And I think that in itself would be a goal that he would want to establish on the ground, the sense that I'm still around, Tripoli hasn't fallen, I'm still giving my speeches, my children are speaking to the international media.
Well, what you're suggesting then is that we are close to an end game, and what you're suggesting is that that end game is going to involve violence. In his speech a couple of nights ago, he said that the Tiananmen Square scenario was something that he considered to be an acceptable scenario if one's to maintain the security of a state, which leaves us in a very worrying position, doesn't it?
Absolutely, but it also creates the opportunity, I think, for the outside world, for the international community to step in and help accelerate.
In what way? Because President Obama's been very reticent to even make a rhetorical
very true
admonishments, let alone anything more practical.
And that's partly puzzling. It's also extremely discouraging, I think, for people inside of Libya and for people within the region who expected, at least given what happened in Tunisia and Egypt, that President Obama would figure out very early on that he needs to be on the right side of history. But there are a number of steps that can be taken, I still believe, by the international community, by the Americans in particular, who wield, despite the isolation that Libya has had from the US for a long period of time, wield influence within pockets of the security and the military establishment. Many of these individuals, like in Egypt, within the military establishment, are connected to the outside world. They can be encouraged, they can be given all sorts of incentives to move and help end this.
Well, such as what? I mean, President Obama has used the old phrase, all options are on the table, but none of them are being picked up off the table at the moment. I mean, what can he do? And more importantly, what will he do? And will Gaddafi pay any attention?
We're assuming that there isn't as much behind the scenes activities as we might be observing elsewhere. I think President Obama, Secretary Clinton might be contemplating all sorts of messaging issues and might be resolving some internal issues, but I think they have options on the table, the American administration, the French government, and others that have dealt with Libya on the military, logistics, and security side in the last few years, and have communication channels with all sorts of personnel inside of this regime. Some of these personnel, and I think that is possibly the likely scenario, to avoid bloodshed, you would want some of the loyalists around him to help step in and bring this game to an end. That could very well happen by some of the people loyalists within his own tribe, who may not want to have to face the day after, when in fact history will not be on their side.
Well, we've seen a steady leak so far. Perhaps we'll see that leak turning into a flood. Thank you, Tarek Youssef, for joining us. Now let's step away from Libya for a moment. Elsewhere in the region, in Yemen, a pro-independence march in the south has turned deadly. An activist there killed by a landmine. That happened in Laudar in the southern Abyan province, which is a stronghold of the secessionist movement in the country. And in Bahrain, the foreign minister says the recent protests have marked a new beginning for reforms that started a decade ago. He's also said everything will be on the table during a national dialogue to resolve the crisis. This after several thousand people marched once again to the Pearl roundabout, the scene of last week's protest and the subsequent government crackdown. The marchers were led by political prisoners who'd been freed. They were chanting slogans against the government and the royal family. And in Egypt, the former information minister has been detained on suspicion of corruption. Anas al-Fiki was arrested at his Cairo home on Thursday morning, and the chief of the state broadcasting, or the former chief rather, Osama el-Sheikh, has also been arrested, and both those men have been banned from travelling. Now, let's move on back to London. Stephen Cole has the latest in the ongoing WikiLeaks case. Stephen, new developments.
Indeed, Tamar. The website's founder has lost his fight against extradition to Sweden. He's wanted there for questioning over allegations of sexual assault. Assange says he'll appeal against the London court's decision, as Tim Friend reports.
This decision is a major blow for Julian Assange and WikiLeaks. The whistleblower who revealed secret US embassy cables to Washington's anger and embarrassment must now face the possibility of a trial on sex charges in Sweden. He says they're politically motivated and designed to smear his reputation. He'll appeal and could still avoid extradition.
What we saw today at Belmarsh was a rubber stamping process that comes as no surprise, but is nonetheless wrong. A rubber stamping process that is a result of a European arrest warrant system run amok.
His defence team say that Assange will not get a fair trial in Sweden, but the UK judge said there was no evidence to support that. There's still a concern amongst Julian Assange's supporters, like these people here, that he could eventually end up being taken to the United States, where many people, US politicians among them, believe that he should be tried for espionage, and WikiLeaks rated as a terrorist organisation.
We are still hopeful that the matter will be resolved in this country. We still remain very optimistic about our opportunities on appeal. The judge made a very important finding in relation to both the fact of a secret trial, which in Sweden, which is an anathema to the open justice principle which we in this country, and I think in most civilized countries of the world, hold very dear.
Assange has the support of celebrities and human rights activists. He denies the sex charges against him, but he must continue to wear an electronic tag which his defence team called degrading and demeaning. Tim Friend, Al Jazeera, Belmarsh Court, London.
An anonymous letter from a number of French diplomats has accused French President Nicolas Sarkozy of making serious foreign policy mistakes. They also say he's weakened France's position on the world stage. Charlie Angela reports.
Impulsive, amateurish and obsessed with image. Criticism for President Nicolas Sarkozy from members of the French diplomatic corps, the very people who represent his country abroad. In a damning yet anonymous letter published in the French newspaper Le Monde, they accuse Sarkozy of eroding France's ability to influence global events, saying,
"Our foreign policy is characterised by improvisation and impulsive decision-making. It's often based on domestic political concerns."
Recently, there have been some embarrassing slip-ups as Tunisia and Egypt erupt